I had heard about these. No.
What do you think?
I think it's pretty cool, but I'm also like, sometimes my digital technology doesn't work, and I'd like to be able to shower at that point, you know? Like.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Editorial Advisor Mike Girton.
Hello, Patrick.
Fine Homebuilding Editorial Director Andrew Zellner.
Hey, Patrick, you'll learn my name one of these days.
And our producer, Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there, too. Well, thanks, guys. It's good to see you all. Sorry I butchered your name there, Andrew.
Oh, that's okay. We've had plenty of time to hang out this week.
What you're referring to is we had our company holiday party, which was a get-together at a restaurant in Newtown. It was super fun. I wish I could have stayed longer, but I had to go and get my boy from school. But it was nice to see people, right?
Yeah. I'm still at the Fine Homebuilding headquarters here in Newtown, and it's like fun to see people. It's like fun to spend time together in like a way, in like a, you don't have to solve work problems, even though you do end up talking about work and like, but yeah, getting to know people a ton. I was like, it's always really great to be at a company where people have been around a long time and there's a lot of like institutional knowledge, and it was fun. You know, we honored a bunch of folks yesterday at the event, including our art director, who was Rodney, who was celebrating 20 years with Taunton.
You know, in modern employment, someone who works for a company 20 years is quite remarkable. I think that's really awesome, both a testament to Taunton's attractiveness as a workplace and the commitment of people who work there. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Jeff, was that the first time you were like out of the house in recent memory, excepting your trip to California?
No, I've been on some shoots and things like that. So, but that's about it.
Did you stay for the whole party, I'm guessing?
Yeah, because we actually ran long because there were a lot of awards and speeches and.
That's cool. Yeah. What else have you been doing, Andrew, while you're here in town? Have you had a chance to see the sights of Newtown?
Yeah, like I was born in Wisconsin, live in Minnesota, like very Midwestern. And like anytime I get even like to like Ohio and East, it just like feels like historic, you know, like none of the roads are straight. There's like stacked stone walls in along the roads and in fields and stuff. And so, I have a very hard time geographically locating myself in Connecticut, because I'm not sure where I am. And so I after work, I'd like pick a destination and drive around and like just take in the sights. The East Coast is a cool place, and I want to spend more time here.
You know, Carol and I had to buy GPS devices shortly after moving here because it's pretty tough to get your bearings because, you know, it was settled rather haphazardly, not like the, grid structure of more modern cities, right?
Yeah.
Well, that part of Connecticut doesn't lend itself well to grids because there's so many hills and streams and other, geographic impediments to grid roads. Everything just curves around whatever the natural landforms were.
And they were, walking paths and cow paths before they were roads, right? It was like how you could physically get your cows from one field to another.
Have you ever heard of a corduroy road? Have you ever heard
in the
term?
context of the Civil War, where they would cut down trees to make roads, right?
Yep. So what they would do in these old muddy farm fields and paths and trails, they would cut down logs or trees and they'd lay them down perpendicular to the direction of travel so that you could get over muddy spots. Well, when my parents purchased a property that I now kind of have over in Rhode Island, there were the old colonial roads still going through the property and adjacent farms, and there was still the old, mostly rotted timbers from the old corduroy roads through the swampy area. So my property abuts what's called Bear Swamp here. And it was kind of, thinking back, it's like I didn't know what I had when it was there, but now all of those old timbers are all rotted now, 50 years later, 60 years later.
That's so cool.
It is. And they're still there. I can still find them, and they've carved in neighborhoods and subdivisions through it. And now it's hard to find those old pathways and trails, which were, you could see that where they had written they were cart paths. You could see with the two, where the wheels would go from the old carts, the old 4 foot 7 inch or whatever it was width they had between them.
What's cool this time of year is you can really see into the woods. And the thing that is so remarkable about Connecticut is the number and frequency of stone walls. Like they're just everywhere, and it's pretty awesome. This is a bony place.
Yeah, it's a cliche, but like I do feel like when I'm in Connecticut, it like looks like the movies a little bit.
Mike, what have you been working on? Have you been working on any of your properties or doing fun stuff?
Well, for the last couple of weeks, I went to my house in Tucson, and Addison, my friend, came with me, and we spent 2 weeks gutting out the master bedroom area. And every time you plan a project and it's in your own house, if I'm figuring out a job, I'm pretty good at gauging how long things will take, because I spend time to actually noodle out, this part will take this long, this part will take that long. But on my own project, I'm not as good at doing that, because there are always those curveballs that when you open up a wall and you see something, I really I'm going to have to rewire this whole thing that you weren't planning on doing. And of course, we only got about half of what I hope to get done. So
you cannot imagine how many people are heartened to hear you say that.
Yeah.
So, master bedroom, I would venture to say, is not a typical place to start a new home, making it more livable. Am I right about that?
Yeah, you'd think you'd dive into a bathroom or kitchen or something like that. But in this house, the bathroom and the bathrooms were in decent shape, and the kitchen's in good shape, and I don't need to dive into those because they were all remodeled around 2004. But this master bedroom is it's 18 feet by 16 feet, which is just like an insane amount of space for a bedroom. And it had a closet, which is, I don't know, like 8 by 8 walk-in closet. And it was the only way to get to the closet was through the bathroom, which made no sense. So thinking about, future use, and I want to have a little office in the house, there was no spot for that. But the master closet was the perfect spot for my office. So I'm turning the master 8 by 8 into my office. So I'll have it won't be off of a hallway. It'll be off of the bedroom. That's okay. And then we took part of that room, that 18 by 18, and divided it off into a closet. So we made the room a little smaller, made a closet out of the space, and it actually is going to work out really well. When you get the idea in your head, you draw it on a piece of paper, and then you make those field adjustments for the closet depth, the closet width, sizing the doors so you're getting the most, and then it's going to have two double acting doors opening into the room. But I wanted the proportions of the three dividers, the left side, the right side, and the center, to be exactly the same. So there's a little math in that and figuring out when it just...
Especially because, like, closet doors are often sized weird, right? They have weird interior sizes compared to other doors, right?
They can.
Yeah.
I'm going to use a conventional, door. I'm buying blanks and I'm making my own is what it amounts to. It's going to be easier to do it that way. And I found a cool little door shop, window and door place, and they got everything I need in a style of door in stock that ordinarily at other places, even most lumber yards, I would have had to special order. So I bought, I think it was 18 door slabs. So now I'm looking at mortising jigs for routering out all the hinges and things like that. So.
I sniff a fine home building feature on setting up a door or a pair of doors.
I also
we'll leave that for Kid Camp or Gary Katz or somebody. That's not my forte.
I really love the visual, Mike, of you getting familiar with this new spot, and like most people be looking for like a good grocery store, like a cool little restaurant, and you're like, I found a great little door place.
Yeah.
Have you been pleased with the suppliers you've worked with so far? Have they done a good job?
Okay, so here's a thing I discovered about the Tucson, Arizona area. The last professional lumber yard in the region, and one of my neighbors has lived there for a lifetime. The last professional lumber yard disappeared like 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Where all contractors buy their materials for the most part for lumber and things, Home Depot or Lowe's. The nearest professional lumber yard's about 60 miles away, as I understand it. So it's a little far to get a professional kind of service. So this little door shop was door and window place was like a lumber yard, that they didn't sell lumber. I'll have to talk to them. Maybe they'll bring in some lumber for me.
Jeff, do you have anything to tell us about working on your place, or were you happy to get back from California, I'm guessing?
No, it's been catching up on work since I got back. So
yeah, that's the problem with going away.
Yeah, paying for vacation.
Yeah. So we heard from our listeners. This one comes from, forgive me, Kerry. Kerry writes, hello, FHB podcasters. On a recent episode, you had a discussion about adding exterior insulation to an existing house. I have a couple of comments and photos for you from my experience doing this to my own house. It's a 47 Cape in Massachusetts, which was fairly original when I moved in. I don't remember it having any insulation in the rafters, but possibly there were some 2-inch fiberglass bats that I found in the walls. When I moved in, I was cash strapped and installed only R20 fiberglass in the rafters, craft face without a vent space. There's been no condensation issue from normal use, but a leaky plumbing vent caused a lot of summer steam on drywall at the peak at one point until I found this source. Anyhow, as expected by the science and my personal past experience, R20 was not even close enough to limit solar gain during summer, though it did seem to provide enough heat, keep enough heat in during the winter. When my asphalt roofing was so old that it grew flora and leaked, I bought used foam board, plywood, 2x4s, and new asphalt roofing to solve my problems. The first note is that I literally got a full 52-foot trailer truck full of reclaimed 2-inch polyiso for $3,600. That's got to be the best deal in building materials, right? It was 9 pallets that were full truck height. It required a long chain and a bobcat with forks to unload. It was enough to add 8 inches to the one roof and 6 inches to my walls for about $2,000 less than new polyiso would have been for the roof alone. Not that this house not that this is a house with 900 square feet of living space, a 24 by 28 footprint, and no dormers, so the house was small and simple to improve. I installed also ice and water shield on the original roof sheathing, creating an air and water barrier so the roof would be waterproof while I picked away at the project. I left flaps of it extended around the roof edges to connect it to a wall air barrier in the future. One of the strangest things I experienced is what was mentioned on the podcast, using 13-inch screws through 8 inches of foam and 2x4 strapping on the flat to sandwich it was possibly the most challenging part. A percentage of screws missed the rafters. I'm pretty dang good at feeling out plumb and level, but between the tiny tolerance for screw angle and the non-straight rafters, it was impossible to have perfect shooting. My house was built by the homeowner in 1947, and it's not particularly level, square, or straight. I hear that all the time. That is a hard thing to do. And I wonder if there's like some kind of jig you could make to keep that screw perfectly vertical, right?
I've had good luck except for things being not straight regarding the rafters. If you do have straight rafters and you can sort of transpose where the positions of each rafter are directly below you, what I've done is I take a drill press. Now I don't use the drill press up on the roof, but I use the drill press, and I take a 4x4 or a 6x6, and then I'll say it's like 4 feet long, and I'll drill holes at the frequency I want those screws to go. Then I'll drop that 4x4 directly over where the position of that rafter should be beneath. But I don't just drive the screws in, because of course then you screw the 4x4 to the roof, but I'll take a long drill bit, like a 1/4-inch drill bit or a 330 or 7/32, and I'll drill that through. Now you don't think about drift through the foam. You think of foam as being like this inert, it's not going to track the screw like the grain of wood would. But it is handy to have that hole in there, because it does help the screw to go a little bit straighter. And then then as I remove the 4x4, then I'll drive that screw down through those holes, and it seems to work a little bit better. I've been able to hit 95% of all the screws into the rafters doing that through thick foam.
That's a great tip. Thanks for that. He said, locating the rafters was a trick. I found the centers at top and bottom and drove 13-inch headlock screws into them to flag their location. I could butt the foam board to these screws and snap a line. Somehow, and honestly, to my surprise, it worked really well unless the rafters weren't straight. You'll see in my photos, sometimes I swear the rafter would disappear. And it makes you wonder what's going on back there, right? It's like, that should be there. Perhaps there was a rounded top edge that deflected the screw, or there was a curve, I don't know. But it was frustrating moments that defied logic. Big note here on this project, the walls, I have exhausted. I use the sheathing as an air barrier, which the fasteners penetrate. Therefore, I leave any screws in place that miss the framing and drive another to hit the framing. The screws plug the holes that would otherwise be air and water leaks. I started my project with repairing the misses by drilling a bigger hole through the 2x strapping and foam board in order to insert a foam gun and seal the hole with spray foam. I soon got annoyed by this extra tedium and started to leave the fasteners in place. Second note, I still have a full sealed bucket of 13-inch screws, which I cannot get rid of myself. I think Facebook Marketplace would be a great place to get rid of those, because somebody's going to want them. Yeah. Another point is to address the structural issue you posted. My educated guess is that my new roof assembly is stronger than pre-retrofit. I've done the equivalent of moving the flanges of an I-joist further apart. There should be less roof deflection with 8 inches of foam board added between the 2x4 strapping/plywood combination and the existing 2x6 rafter. Isn't a 12-inch SIP panel stronger than a 6-inch SIP panel? Is that true? I don't know if that's true.
Well, with regard to the SIP panel, that might be the case, but I think what he's talking about, where you're screwing through, I don't know if there's going to be enough like bond with those screws that you're not going to get any shifting of the rafter at one position and the 2x at the other, that you're actually increasing the strength. I think we need an engineer to weigh in.
Yeah, I was going
to
say, I'm guessing there's an engineer who would say it's stronger, and I'm guessing there's many engineers who say it's not any stronger, right? I don't know. I think would take testing. The final assembly is vented on top of the foam with 2x4 strapping, which helps keep the assembly dry should there ever be a leak, and also, why not? Frankly, adding this R40 on the roof of a cape is the best one can do to make those awful second-floor rooms livable without shocking amounts of air conditioning and heat. A friend who's been in the high-performance world since the 1970s recently noted that it can be tough to sell high-performance building envelopes because there is no way to communicate the experience in living in one of these homes. He said that he has literally designed hundreds of high-performance buildings, and not one customer has regretted the extra insulation and triple-glazed windows. However, many people do experience discomfort with code-built homes that they assume is a normal part of living in our Northeast winters. Sincerely, Kerry. Well, Kerry, that was quite an undertaking. Did you guys check out these photos?
You know what impressed me most about the photos is that the pile of foam was as big as the house. When you see it in the yard, it was like, I think I'd be intimidated by a whole tractor trailer of foam, thinking, "Oh, now I've got to put this on the house." That is,
I swear, when we worked at the lumber yard, we didn't get foam deliveries that big. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Oh, what a project, though. Good for you, Kerry. Martin Holliday has an interesting piece on Green Building Advisor this morning, and he says it's okay to like live with your bad building envelopes, which was kind of a shock to me. He's like, we have a lot going on in our lives, and does like air sealing my leaky old house really rise to the top of the things I want to do on the weekends or in my free time? And I was like, well, Martin Holliday says it's okay. It must be. This comes from Andy. Andy has some thoughts on toxic substances. Hi, FHP podcast crew. I heard the question about chemical sensitivities on the last podcast. What the builders have been saying about control through air sealing and mechanical ventilation makes sense. However, listening to this segment, some other analogous advice from builders came to mind about locating bathroom vent fans directly above showers, that is, practicing effective source control. In this sense, reducing compounds that might off-gas or are known to be harmful seems pretty reasonable. As far as quantifying what levels of exposure is harmful, that is a long and winding road in the USA. We only just mandated that new chemicals should be reviewed before being produced or imported in 2016 amendments to the Toxic Substances Control Act. In the original 1976 Act, it was assumed that anything currently in use was safe until proven harmful. Naturally, things like asbestos weren't banned until a decade of research went through, and the ban was overturned in just 2 years, even though the court overturning the ban stated it was a carcinogen at any exposure level. Between 1976 and 2016, the EPA regulated the use of fewer than 10 of the 86,000 registered chemicals used in commerce. Unfortunately, the 2016 amendments are not that effective either. It places the burden on obtaining necessary data for evaluation on the EPA, lacks rigorous logical adjustments to evaluation to account for vulnerable populations and non-acute exposures, and preempts state action in some cases. A recent review showed that the first 10 evaluations performed by the EPA after the 2016 amendments were scientifically and medically inadequate. In short, at the personal level, the best thing one could do is to use products that are, 1, unlikely to be source of harmful chemicals, and 2, have been evaluated by more stringent and scientifically sound methodologies such as the European Union's Registration, Evaluation, Authorization, and Restriction of Chemicals. REACH is the acronym. Some people might say that chemical sensitivities aren't a concern for the average person, and that might be true. However, I'm stealing this directly from a talk by Ty Newell. 1, we don't design houses to withstand an average day of weather for good reasons. We typically use 99% winter design temperatures and 1% summer design temperatures when sizing HVAC systems, for example. Number 2, we don't design 5-foot 7-inch doorway heights, even though that's the average person's height in the U.S. The standard door height is 13 inches taller. Averages reduce populations to a one-dimensional metric that doesn't tell the whole story about heterogeneity in present and past conditions and attributes. Can you guys tell me what heterogeneity means? No, Mike's shaking his head. Every single person at one stage or more stage in their life is guaranteed to not be an average person. Children, who love to put all kinds of building materials in their mouths, and the elderly are especially universal examples of vulnerable subpopulations. And becoming more vulnerable to chemicals could happen to anyone at any time in life. Once it happens, it's difficult to remedy, even if the paths are known and the person has specialized knowledge and skills for how to achieve that path, as demonstrated by the person who wrote into the podcast. He has the exact skill set necessary to build a custom residence to reduce his symptoms, and apparently it took him decades to get somewhat back to normal. This isn't meant as a slight against him, but rather to illustrate just how debilitating being unlucky could turn out to be in our current design paradigm. If you're interested in getting an overview of indoor air quality, it might be worth looking up IAQ Radio and interviewing the host on the Pro Talk podcast. I don't have the professional judgment to say whether or not they're a good resource, but they've interviewed Allison Bales and Joe Steebrook. I assume this is how YouTube algorithms recommended their channel to me. Cheers, Andy. What do you guys think about that?
I think that's extremely well written.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think he makes a good point that, we can't assume everyone's going to respond the same to any one of these things that are potentially dangerous in our homes or lives.
And we want to have homes that last a long time and lives that last a long time too. And so it's you can get sort of short-sighted in design for who you are now or build for who you are now. But like, hopefully you'll be a person in 30 years and you'll likely be a much different person.
I'm delighted that conversation generated other feedback from listeners. I think it has gotten short shrift in the communication and building science for a couple decades, yeah. Mm-hmm. This comes from Steve MacDougall, who is an engineer in Ontario, and he wrote in about our conversation with engineered and trusses and I-joists and their performance in fires. Hi, FHB crew. Love the show, and I figured I'd help back up your comments in episode 513 regarding the potential failure of metal truss plates during a fire. I'm a structural engineer in Ontario, Canada, specializing in the assessment of damaged buildings for insurance companies. This includes fire, explosions, high winds, snow load collapses, vehicle impacts, and any number of ways people can manage to damage a building. I've seen hundreds of fire-damaged houses with trusses, and I can assure you the metal plates simply do not fall off during a fire. Typically, by the time you need to worry about the metal plates, the fire has already consumed the wood truss members and the roof sheathing above. I've attached some photos that you might be surprised of how badly roof trusses can be burnt without completely collapsing. Your comments regarding I-joists were also spot on. The larger ratio of surface area to their cross-sectional width compared with traditional solid lumber means the I-joist webs are more likely to be burnt through. This can make the floor at a much higher risk of collapse. The goal with any fire is to get the people out safely. Everything else can be replaced. Even if the structure is saved, the smoke and water do so much damage that most houses I see with structural damage end up being gutted back to the studs to ensure the odor has been properly remediated. I would focus on fire safety and maybe having a good insurance policy before worrying about how well the framing is going to stand up in a fire. Keep up the good work. I'm on my way to the season's first structural collapse from snow. Did you see the photos of that hay barn that was pancaked? Yeah.
Fantastic photo. Like, it does put things into perspective. Like how resilient our building materials are until they aren't, you know?
I think you'd agree this is a really economical building, and often with economy comes lack of redundancy. And I had a chance to interview Steve on the Pro Talk podcast this week, and we talked about that and a number of other issues. So great conversation. I think you all should go check that out. And he said part of the problem with that hay barn, and I'll post pictures of that on the podcast page too for listeners, was at the bottom of the post that these metal trusses connected to at the top and supported the kind of fabric roof material were somewhat rotted at grade, as they often are when you direct bury posts, right? So when this thing got creamed with that snowstorm that pummeled Buffalo and actually canceled the NFL football game and left Buffalo area with 5 feet of snow in some parts, also was the same storm that crushed this hay barn. What do you guys think about Steve's letter? Is it reasonable to assume that, you know, fire is going to destroy the building or the firefighting efforts and smoke? So why worry about it?
I think it's good practical advice. It's like not something it's not a conclusion you come to until you have perspective, I think. Like, you're worried about your property and your stuff, but it's like the way to fix it is like this total gut and like rebuild anyway. So it feels like pretty solid frame of thinking.
He made the point that especially commercial insurance policies like the one that was covering this hay barn for this farmer often have provisions that are based on the age of the structure. So they are prorated based on how old the building is. So you don't get the replacement value. You get what the insurance company decided it was going to be worth. And I'm betting, especially with the cost of things currently, it's not going to be enough money to rebuild that structure unless you have the right policy. Have you ever had to make claims on any of your rental properties, Mike?
Yeah. One that, though not on my rental property, but my mother's place in Florida was totaled.
Recently, right?
Yeah, and you're right about the insurance because it was built in 1980 or 81, and the way the policy was written, there were limits on it, and because of the hurricane zone. And anyway, it was only the replacement is about 3 times the cost of what the insurance payout was. And you would not be able to actually insure the property for more than what the value cost to replace was, at least in that situation. There are other policies that if you're not in some areas that are prone to hazards where you could get insurance that would cover it, but it's still a problem. You often when you get the insurance payout for different problems, disasters, you're not going to be able to actually do the work for what you get from the insurance company.
What do
not
you
that
do?
I'm knocking insurance companies, it's just the way the system works.
Who has that kind of money?
Yeah. I've on my rental properties, I only had one claim. I tried, most small things that happen. I haven't luckily had many disasters, but most small problems I could put a claim in. I'd rather not because I don't want to upset the fact that I really count on the insurance for a catastrophic loss. So I did have a big giant tree fall on a house, and fortunately I know a lot of people in like Steve, structural engineers who do insurance work, so I can consult with them. And I also know people who can cost it all out on the assessment side, and was able to actually get more than what it would cost me to do the repairs. However, if I had hired somebody to do the work, the numbers wouldn't have worked out. I would have still had to probably chip in. So I guess for contractors who can do their own work, it is, or somebody who's handy, a homeowner, you can actually, the insurance payout would be enough to cover the repairs if you do the labor yourself.
Andrew, Jeff, have you had to make claims on your homeowners policies ever?
I made one just because for a roof leak and drywall repair, which again I did the work myself, so I probably made out ahead. But
you also had to fix your roof, right?
Yeah.
Instead of having someone else fix it. Yeah. I, knock on wood, have not had to make a claim ever, to my knowledge.
You're lucky. I mean, I think most people would. You pay the fee and you pay the premium, and you're like, what am I getting for my money? But hopefully, you never have to use it.
Right. Our first question comes from another Steve. I avidly listen to your show so I can be an educated client of designers, GC, and tradespeople while building. I retired this year after managing hardware and software engineering teams in Silicon Valley since 1995. My wife and I purchased 2 acres in Northwest Arkansas and are just wrapping design development with the architects. Thinking about how digital technology can be applied to MEP, I was struck by what seems like a missed opportunity. The advent of digital shower valves like Kohler's Anthem mean the valve can be remote from the control. Can we put the valve quite close to the fixture and reduce the lag temperature change? For that matter, why do recirculation lines usually loop off in the floor rather than right up the last 6 feet to the primary fixture? Branching the recirc line close to the valve would save a small but significant amount of water. Perhaps more importantly, with both valves and recirc branches close to the fixture, the shower becomes more responsive. Is there a code or other installation requirement that mandates a distance between shower fixtures and the valve? Thanks, Steve. Oh, Steve, this is a very good question. What do you guys think about this? Were you familiar with these valves, any of you?
I had heard about these. No.
What do you think?
I think it's pretty cool, but I'm also sometimes my digital technology doesn't work, and I'd like to be able to shower at that point.
Ditto.
So we should describe that these are high-end shower products, and they're meant to be able to be controlled with your phone or whatever, so you can start the water running while you're in your bedroom and have the shower nice and hot, or the steam generator going or whatever, right? And Steve's question is, can you use this same technology to put the shower valve, say, for example, right next to the water heater? So when you turn on the hot water, it's instantaneous without the wasted energy of recirculation systems, which do have an energy penalty owing to the fact that you're always going to leave some amount of hot water in the lines for a period of time that then the heat radiates off them and it's lost to the building. So what do we think? Is this conceivable?
You can engineer anything you want. I find that more complexity you put into any building assembly where the manufacturer doesn't have a control over the entire system, then where you're taking something and you're trying to put it together with other pieces and parts, that they don't always play well together. And they have unanticipated consequences from when you do things that are outside of a manufacturer's boxed unit.
I recall, and it was early in my career, I reviewed or wrote a product up, and I can't remember what it was, but it used small solenoids in a manifold, I recall, and electronically opened them and closed the valves, and it was meant to do something very similar to what Steve describes, but it never caught on because of the complexity, right? What plumber is going to know how to fix this stuff when you need them to fix it?
And there's the other problem. New products come on the market all the time, and there's just no way that our trade contractors or we can keep abreast of that maintenance and repair aspect of all of these products. I've got a couple of things now that I'm dealing with where the manufacturer made it for 4 years, and then poof, no repair parts, no backup. Oh yeah, we discontinued that 12 years ago. Yeah, but now what do? I can't get parts. I can't get service. Nobody knows how to repair it. Or no.
Can I guess what it is?
Go ahead.
A heat pump.
No.
That's the one I keep hearing about.
Really?
Yeah.
What are you hearing?
That when you have problems with your mini splits or ducted mini splits, technicians don't know how to fix them. Or they can't get the repair parts. Oftentimes the printed circuits and those things that are highly technical are very hard to come by. And that's, I would argue, like the other stuff is very simple and conventional, but that's the hard part.
Boy, and when if that's going to be the case going forward with heat pumps, I mean, a friend of mine who was not in the building industry, he clipped something out from a major newspaper, and it was like heat pumps are the future kind of thing, and it described how we move to a more electrification and away from fossil fuel use at individual residences, that the heat pumps are going to be the solution. But what you're pointing out is this isn't a problem just for today. It's a problem going forward. So in that case, are we going to need to, I'm thinking about this from a builder standpoint, do we need to build boxes into our buildings where we have our line set out to our outdoor unit and boxes on the inside where we can actually pull the old component out and put a new one in because you can't get the parts. So you're going to end up buying the whole cassette or the whole indoor unit just to make it just swap them out instead of doing a repair.
Like how car radios used to all be the same size, right? You could put any aftermarket car radio in any car.
In any dashboard, exactly. Yeah.
Well, it's like the same conversation, that right to repair bills in the U.S. are dealing with, like even thinking of your cell phone, like it's become an essential part of most people's lives. And when it breaks, it's hard to repair. It takes some specialized tools, and it creates a significant amount of waste if you can't repair it. So repairability isn't a conversation in heat pumps yet, but I totally agree. It needs to be.
There was a New York Times story recently that talked about what Germany is doing in this space, which Germany was very dependent on fossil fuels for decades and still is. and they're trying to go with renewables and heat pumps like we're talking about here, and they have the same problems with finding enough technicians to install these things, and sometimes you have to wait 6 months or a year to get your new heat pump installed, and the manufacturers of these pieces of equipment are stepping up with the training, which is something I think we should be doing in this country. And maybe it needs to be incentivized, but someone is going to have to train a whole bunch more refrigeration techs if we're going to be able to do this switch over.
YouTube videos.
But you can't buy refrigerants if you're not trained, and for a good reason, right?
Well, talking about that, as we move to new generation refrigerants and utilizing refrigerants like just CO2, could they develop things where you just it becomes something that's non-hazardous? If you mess it up, it's not going to be a problem. It's a benign chemical of those 86,000 one of our previous commenters mentioned. But no, seriously, if we were able to do it, we got to simplify it, I guess. So that, homeowner could get, you can buy a kit that, just like recharging your AC in your car, you can just buy a kit, boom, you can do it yourself. But without Freon.
Yeah, and I mean, refrigerants need to have a number of properties, right? And the heat of vaporization is one. That's like, but they also need to be like non-flammable, and the more safer, more benign refrigerants seem to operate at much higher pressures, which means that you need like brazing skills to connect refrigeration lines. Whereas, when my uncle was working on R22 systems, those were only, you could use a propane torch. It didn't require the intense temperatures that the modern refrigerants require. So, one part gets easier, but one part gets harder potentially. And I think that CO2 systems hold great promise, but they're also extremely expensive right now.
Well, good career choice getting into HVAC.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think you could write your own ticket. I mean, you could live anywhere. You could work from any number of companies. You could change and advance,
One young man who worked on the 2016 Pro Home, he was in high school at the time when we were building it, Nick. His father worked for an HVAC company. He had Nick had the mindset of a young person in that technology didn't scare him. He went to work for the company that his father worked for. They put him to school, learning all the electronics, learning all of the technical side of it. And now he's moved up several stages. So he's probably like 23 now. And I'll bet he's making over 6 figures.
He should. Because he has specialized knowledge, right? And
high school education, a little bit of advanced training, and I know last I heard he had at least a dozen people working under him, and just in HVAC.
The demand is there. Like every service truck I see on the road has signs on it saying, now hiring, every one.
Yeah.
Well, we heard from our dear friend Barbara in Georgia. Yes, that Barbara. She's been updating us on a building that she's been adapting into an artist studio slowly, and she writes in, I've finally got my mouse proofing done at the corrugated steel edges. I use spray foam, wire mesh, and Flex Seal. While I wait for the spray foam contractor to come spray the corrugated steel surfaces to insulate the space generally, I will work on the floor and the plate glass windows. I want to level the slab, but my brother and father think I'm being ridiculous. There's one place that it drops quickly by 1.5 inches, and it's stained with rat doings that pressure washing didn't budge. I want to build it up with sand topping mix and finish it with self-leveler. My brother, with civil engineer credentials, agrees this will work if I use a lot of bonder. He just thinks it's too much work. But I'm envisioning a floor where I can roll perfectly in a high-end desk chair. If I drop a small finding from jewelry making, I can spot it easily on my clean and attractive floor. I will have white Corian workbenches. Do you guys remember Dorian's Corian? This is her Aunt Dorian redid her bathrooms, and Barbara ended up with the Corian countertops. The whole space in there is meant to be a sparkling contrast to the live edge heartwood posts and rough framing and patina steel of the structure. It's okay if nobody understands my artistic vision. I'm just a little insulted that they think I don't deserve a level floor in the place where I'll be working to earn a living for the rest of my life. I mean, it's a one-day job. So I'll hire a guy to bring a mixing barrel and lift the 60-pound bags for me, and we will get it done. If he came for 2 days to help me put up the frame and screw on the ceiling, so he already knows what I'm trying to do. Maybe next week. Hope you have a good holiday and get lots of projects done. Well, Barbara, I think you know how I roll. That's what I look forward to the holidays for, honestly. So how do we fix Barbara's floor? And I totally agree that no one should be telling her how to be decorating or improving her space, but her, right?
It sounds like the way she explains it, if you've got the floor out in a short distance that's dropping 1.5 inches, then yeah, you level that thing up, do it once, do it right, and it's going to be there for a long time.
Do you think, I mean, I've tried topping mix with limited success. Is that, no, you're shaking your head. What do you think is the right,
there are those, there are concrete leveling. Well, it's not a leveling compound that you use sort of as an underlayment, but there are, I can only think of Abitron, but I know there's a bunch of others where they're self-leveling concrete finishing materials. And we see them used a lot. I see them used a lot in some big box stores where they've gone in and pulled out the vinyl composite tile, and then they've sort of patched over. And you can see they've feathered the edge out. Now, I know they'll go back with a diamond grinder, and that might be something that Barbara would have to do, go back with a diamond grinder after, because sometimes they won't go to a perfect feathered edge. But after you put those compounds on, and her brother's right, with the bonder on there, you'll get good adhesion, so you don't end up with the separation, the lifting between the layers that you added. And then what doesn't form out perfectly at the perimeter of the patch to level it out, you just take that diamond grinder with some water and you just hone it right down, and you can polish that, finish it, and it'll be like she said, you'll be able to scoot right along with a wheeled chair, and it'll feel smooth, like it was no unevenness at all.
Good advice. I've seen gypsum underlayments poured in high-end houses. Is that a suitable product for this? No. Why?
No. So the gypsum products are usually, they're an underlayment product. So they're not usually, at least from my experience, not intended for traffic. Usually you put down a floor over it. We use those a lot with in-floor heating when we used to do that. Because it flows, it's
watery.
It's like water, yeah. And then a day later, it hardens right up. But I think that you're going to need a concrete product that's going to have that hard, will not, debond or crack or anything finish on it.
I was going to offer briefly, sometimes it's just easier to pour an entirely new slab over a entirely destroyed one. You don't need, you need a normal concrete crew. You don't need specialized products or training to do an overpour. And it might be worth exploring that, Barbara, because some of these self-leveling products are very expensive, as I recall. And I would stay away from the topping mix. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah.
So I'm just looking up now. Abicrete from Abitron is one that we've used. It is expensive. They are expensive.
How do you guys feel about concrete as the floor in a studio space?
Existing concrete? You mean if you've got a studio where you got existing concrete that has something over it and then exposing the concrete and finishing it?
I'm more so I don't like standing on concrete for longer than I have to, and thinking about if having a finished concrete floor is like the best thing if we're thinking about this high-end studio space with sparkling white Corian workbenches. Like, is there something else she should do floor-wise?
You know, I couldn't help but think about like tapered sleepers and a plywood subfloor, but I was like thinking about where Barbara is in the like sweaty South, right? And you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And you know, you could potentially have a condensing surface, you know, and that would seem like less good to have wood on top of it, right?
Yeah.
So you're right, Andrew. Though I've worked a lot on concrete floors, and it's taxing. Your legs just feel like rubber at the end of the day. But you can, if you are in a work situation, you can get the cushioned flooring that you just install right over that. It's got a lip on it. In fact, I'm in my basement, and it's a concrete slab, and all I did was I took the interlocking workout mats, which are about a half-inch thick, and that's my finished flooring over the concrete. So there are inexpensive, simple things that could be done over it, maybe not be a problem, as you're mentioning, Patrick, with the hot, humid South.
Yeah. Everything is context specific, and maybe she has interest that, you know, you want a fireproof floor, glass making, or you know, metalworking, right? You kind of have to have concrete just for safety. I have concrete in here, and it's fine, but like Mike said, I have a mat for when I'm using my desk standing up. I have a mat to stand on because it is kind of awful after a period.
I think they're called anti-fatigue mats.
Yeah. And I think another solution are stall mats that, you know, people with horses and livestock have for their animals, you know.
Rubber mats,
Yeah. This is from Andrew in Vancouver. Hi there. I thank you so much for this valuable resource. I became a GPA member only recently and have been busily devouring all the incredible information and insights shared here as I undertake an insulation upgrade to our home's existing basement walls. Oh, I should remind folks before I do this, the podcast after show is about inventions by tradespeople and tools invented by specifically, and some building products. But, you know, I can safely say that people who work with their hands forever have figured out better tools for what they're doing, and tradespeople can make a lot of money if they come up with the right thing. But it's not an easy road to navigate, right, Mike?
That's right.
So we got a number of folks to talk about who have made it, and some that don't, and ask for your ideas for our $1 million idea, right?
We're guaranteed to share at least a few $1 million ideas on the after show, so you should become a member for sure.
I think I've gleaned the best approach to insulating my basement from the many posts and drawings shared on GBA, but I haven't found reference to my specific situation. We're in Vancouver, British Columbia, U.S. Climate Zone 4, and have a 1968 Vancouver Special. It's a simple 2-story home, typically built as a slab on grade, but in our case, 2.5 feet below grade. We have 7.5-foot high basement ceilings, but the bottom 2.5 feet of the wall is the concrete foundation stem wall, atop which sits an insulated stud assembly for the upper 5 feet. We've been having moisture and mold issues and are taking steps to remediate this by fixing some cracks in the foundation wall, addressing moisture diffusion over the slab floor by applying a chemical vapor barrier, and addressing condensation by improving wall insulation and eliminating the significant thermal bridging happening between the lower foundation wall and the interior drywall. For this last task, I'm wondering if anyone has advice on how I should approach insulating this wall section, given the awkward foundation part and stud wall configuration. I've attached a diagram showing the existing conditions and my proposed changes, which involve ripping out the existing furring strips, attaching a continuous layer of 1-inch rigid foam against the concrete stem wall and all the way up to the ceiling, reattaching 1x3 wood furring strips to minimize future moisture/rot issues, and then hanging new non-paper-faced drywall. My main questions are, do I need to consider any additional exterior wall treatments for moisture/air barrier beyond caulking and foaming up cracks and holes? Presumably, I will want the wall to be able to breathe to the outside, so caulking cracks followed by Roxol bats should be adequate? Should I extend 1-inch rigid foam all the way to the ceiling so as to have a wall assembly with a continuous layer of taped and sealed rigid foam acting as a vapor barrier in lieu of poly sheeting? Since I'm rebuilding the framing to accommodate this in the lower wall section, it seems like I might as well do it all the way up. Or alternately, I could just install a poly vapor barrier in the upper wall section. One of my key questions is, if I do the continuous rigid foam from slab to ceiling, do I need a poly vapor barrier anywhere if I'm diligent about sealing the layer of foam? Many thanks to the GBA community for any advice and assistance. So if y'all didn't get it by now, I stole this from GBA because it seemed like such a common scenario and a great thing to talk about in the podcast. Mike, you agree this is a common scenario, right?
I'm sorry?
You agree this is a common scenario?
Well, is it a common scenario where you've got a concrete partial knee wall and then and then a frame wall above it, and then you've got to insulate, air seal it, and deal with the moisture problems? So this is in Vancouver, Canada. So in British Columbia, and I think they're in a fairly high rain and moisture area. Mm-hmm. So he's talking about drying to the outside, and one of the, I won't say a peculiarity, but poly vapor barriers on the inside, we usually don't recommend those here in the States. But up in Canada, in the very, very cold climates, it's a common practice. However, this is in climate zone 4 because it's fairly temperate out on the Pacific coast there in Vancouver. And I wonder what's going to happen if you've got high moisture on the outside most of the year, and you're putting a poly vapor barrier on the inside, or the foam that he's talking about, and wants to let the wall dry to the outside. And I'm confused by the building science, and we need a building scientist to weigh in on this because it is a little bit trickier than a common situation.
I would ask where the moisture is going to come from that needs to dry, but, weird things happen. But assuming the, water management details on the outside of the building and the grading and all the other things are, consistent with good practice, the wall shouldn't be getting wet, especially if you have a good interior air barrier, because that's where a good percentage of the dampness could come from, because the basement being below grade is going to be cooler and potentially have higher relative humidity than the warmer upstairs. Am I right?
We have been having moisture and mold issues, which are taking steps to remediate it. So already they've got some moisture that's coming from somewhere, and you're absolutely right. They've got to solve that problem. That's key to the whole thing being able to work. But in the event that there is not, because this is a lower level, so it's a slab. So if the moisture is coming either through the slab or through the that little short concrete wall, that has to be solved, hands down, in order for the performance of whatever assembly to be built is going to work effectively in the long term. Otherwise, that could be a moisture source that you can't remediate another way. The wall assembly could have problems if the moisture is coming through that concrete and they haven't effectively blocked it.
I think, seasonal dehumidification might be required, even if they get the, bulk water intrusion solved. Sometimes you just have to dehumidify a basement because it's cool and consequently damp.
So in building an assembly like this, the idea of running the foam on the inside of the exterior wall is a good practice, and it's been shown to be effective at reducing that as a condensing surface in the event that the temperature on the outside is cold. But they're in zone 4. That's not probably going to be much of a problem. But I've never seen where somebody's run the foam up on the inside of the stud wall. Do you think that would be a safety? I mean, not a safety, but a problem at all, Patrick?
I don't think it's a problem, but it's got to be, it's way less resilient than something that can dry. So, I mean, it has to be detailed perfectly, and everything has to work exactly right for that to be a safe assembly.
No, I hate to. I'm one. Go ahead, Andrew. I won't.
I was going to ask, is there a way to do this without foam?
And one of the things that the foam does is it gives you a thermal break, a thermal bridge break, right? Yep. So I've never said this on the podcast, but it's been said many times, is Von Fig, is what about instead of running the foam all the way up, run the foam up that concrete and then put foam pieces over each stud. And then put a vapor retarder, maybe a smart vapor retarder on the inside, and then use the paper-free drywall on the inside. And that way you can have a little drying to the outside, a little bit drying to the inside, and it, in the terms of forgiveness of moisture problems, coupled with your idea, Patrick, of seasonal dehumidification on the inside, you'd have a less potential, a wall which is less prone to, in the event there is moisture that is migrating up through the concrete, through that concrete stem wall, even after you've done your remediation things, that it would not be a place where the moisture is going to accumulate in the wall.
I was thinking maybe mineral wool, rigid mineral wool would be another more resilient, forgiving assembly, because that is very vapor open despite its insulation quality. So maybe that's a way to go.
And using the rigid stone wool insulation on the inside face of the wall. Yeah, same idea, but not using a foam product, which is, though vapor permeable, depending on the type you use, it's less vapor permeable than that compressed rigid rock wool would be.
You know, I'm going to say that insulate the concrete with the foam, fill the stud cavities, make sure they're well air sealed, and get on with your life. You know, like it's a mild climate, you know, it's not where you are, Andrew, or you know, even where we are. It's much more temperate. Good question, Andrew. And thanks for subscribing to GBA, because it is a wonderful community, and I figured that the knowledge shared there can benefit all of us on the podcast too. Speaking of the podcast after show is coming up, folks. We're going to talk about tradesperson designed products and tools, and sometimes it's a win, sometimes it's not. But you know, everyone thinks they can build a better mousetrap, and sometimes you can. Whether you can get paid for it is another thing, right? Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Andrew, Mike, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Thanks very much for listening.